so often sleep training can get talked about as like this rite of passage. And, like we said, I'm never going to give like a blanket statement of every family needs to sleep train, because it totally depends on the family's priorities and their circumstances and their goals and just their family life in general on whether they would want to or not. So while sleep training can absolutely be beneficial and is a valid choice, it's also, you're not going to do a disservice or put your child at a disadvantage if you don't sleep train. Your child will not sleep with you or need you to sleep forever. It may be 2 years or 5 years or 10 years, or, at the very least, when they move out of the house, they're going to move past needing your help to sleep at some point.
You're listening to episode 90 of the MomTalks with Christa podcast. Thanks for joining me, guys. We have another great episode for you today. I have Carianna Gibb here, who is a pediatric sleep consultant. I know we have a lot of questions about sleep coming, so we can never have too many sleep experts on the show. Today, we're covering all about sleep myths. So I think it's a really important episode. If you have questions about sleep training, if you're interested in it, and so much more. If you missed last week, we talked to Ashley Now from Get Mom Strong, and she just had an amazing story of how she took matters into her own hands of building her body back up in a safe manner, as opposed to doctors just saying her body was just normal, like there's nothing she could do about it. And she was like, I'm gonna do my own research and see what I can do to tighten up my core and feel better about myself. And next week, join me for a solo pod where I actually share a peanut pod that I did where I talk about coping when times get tough. And my reason for sharing this, and of course it's all anonymous, it's only in the parts where I'm talking. And I just want you guys to kind of get a feel of what the peanut pods are like and to kind of pull you that direction. The peanut pods are a great way to interact, ask questions, share what's going on, and so much more. So to kind of go with that, our next peanut pod is tomorrow at 1 p.m. Central. And if you want to join updates on the Peanut Pod app or the Peanut app, you can join Mom Talks with Christa there. And we have bi-weekly discussions. And then we're always having daily discussions within the group as well. So I hope you guys join me there. And last but not least, if you're not in our Facebook group, go on and join our Facebook group. Our links are all in the description. We've got tons of ways to connect, and I hope to see you in one of them. And now, without further ado, I have my interview with Carianna Gibb. And at the very end, we are doing our Mom Tales of the Week, which we are sharing some funny food-related stories. So I promised you a short intro this time. So without further ado, enjoy this interview, and I'll see you guys next week. Hey guys, thanks for joining me for another episode of Mom Talks with Christa. We have another exciting episode for you today. I talk with Carianna Gibb, who is a pediatric sleep consultant, and she debunks the top myths about sleep training. And this is so important because we see myths all the time. And she really breaks down the fact that parenting is not black and white. What works for one family is not going to work for another. I know we talk about this a lot here on the show, but she talks about it in regards to sleep training. People see sleep training and they get scared that it's this one thing that someone they know did, when there's a huge spectrum of sleep training and what it is. So if you're just a little curious about what it is, or you've heard friends talk about it, go to the expert, listen to this episode. She has just so much knowledge about this topic. So I think you're really going to enjoy this episode. And of course, stick around at the very end for our Mom Tales of the Week, where we read your fun responses to our questions about motherhood, parenting, and all that good stuff on social media. And this is a good one. All right, without further ado, here's my interview with Carianna Gibb. I'm so excited to talk to you today because I know we're covering a big topic. We get questions about baby and toddler sleep all the time. But before we get started, tell us about you and what you do, and we'll kind of go from there.
Yeah, so I'm a mom myself. I have 2 boys. I have a 6 and 8-year-old. They're getting so old now. My husband and I, we've been married for almost 11 years. We're in the process of becoming foster parents too. So that's kind of our next big thing that we're doing. But I'm a pediatric sleep consultant. So I help families when they're struggling with sleep. I specifically work with ages 0 to 5 when families are struggling, and just try to give them tools and strategies that they feel comfortable with, that they can use to get sleep going a little smoother for everyone.
Awesome. You're definitely needed because like I said, there's so many questions just about sleep, and every baby's so different. So it's always great to have an expert come on and talk about, different tips. But first, can we talk a little bit about the stigma against sleep training? I think people hear sleep training and they're like, oh my gosh, that immediately means cry it out, or that immediately means neglect my baby. So can you kind of break down this stigma and break down what sleep training actually means?
Yeah, you're so right. I feel like sleep training gets put in this teeny tiny box when really it could mean a whole host of things. Sleep training doesn't mean that we're wanting your 8-week-old to just suddenly go all night without feeds and we're going to withhold any comfort or anything like that. But it's often the extremes that get brought up and that people are worried about. And I think too, this is kind of just a parenting phenomena in general, but the decisions we make as parents, we think are the best decisions, right? That's why we make them. But then sometimes from that comes this judgment of, well, then any other decision isn't the right one or isn't good enough. And so I think that's why sleep can be so polarizing, because what some families choose to do, then they view the opposite as just bad. Oh, I would never ever do that. So yeah, it can be really sticky when we're talking about sleep. And a lot of it is just the discomfort that we feel as parents with crying as well. It can be really hard to hear our child be frustrated. And I'm a mom too, so I get it. Like, I don't like when my children cry. I don't relish, having other children cry. But a lot of times we kind of project some of our own emotional baggage on our kids when it comes to crying, instead of just kind of taking a step back and saying, okay, what is it that they are communicating? And I can still be responsive and comforting. That doesn't mean that I can't have some kind of boundary around sleep at the same time.
That's a really good point about putting your own kind of emotional, and we hear this too with different types of parenting too, when we respond or how we react to our kids is a lot of times like how maybe we were taught to respond growing up without actually asking ourselves why we're responding a certain way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great point. So for those listening that are kind of like maybe interested or like, oh, is this the right thing for me? Kind of like tiptoeing their way in, who is sleep training for? And you kind of mentioned there's like a broad spectrum. So like, what is that spectrum of sleep training? I'm sure there's like hundreds of types, but like, what are kind of like the main ones that people kind of go to?
So I would say, to answer your first question, sleep training is for anybody who feels like, one, they want to do it, right? So it's not something that everyone must do. And I think we're going to talk about that soon too. But it's, if the sleep habits that you're currently going through and entrenched in, if those aren't sustainable for the parents, for the child, if it's just not sustainable and everyone feels like they're kind of drowning, sleep training is a great option for helping you change that. I'll also say, on the flip side, you don't have to be drowning before you make the decision to sleep train. You can be proactive about it. And I work with a lot of families in that boat too. So I don't want it to come off as, yes, we have to be in survival mode before we can even think about this.
Okay.
And really, as far as this is where the term sleep training and what different people mean by it comes into play. We're building sleep habits from day one, and newborns need a lot of comfort. They need a lot of soothing, a lot of touch, a lot of bonding, but there's also that habit component to it. And so some families choose from the beginning to start just practicing here and there, putting them in their crib for sleep, maybe doing some drowsy but awake. And again, that's absolutely some form of sleep training, not what we typically think of when we think of this, hardcore sleep training term, but that is sleep training too. So, some families approach it like that when they're younger. As they get older, that's when we can be a little more rigid, is not the word, but a little more structured and intentional rather than just practicing here or there. We can get a little more intentional with what we're doing and habits we're changing. And like I said, I work with kids up to 5 years. Honestly, any age we are at my age as an 80-year-old, we may have sleep habits that we need to change. Like I know as a mom, I'm guilty of falling asleep often after being on my phone, right? Like I feel like I have to check my phone before I fall asleep. If that was becoming a problem, that's a habit that I can always change. I'm not stuck in that even as a 33-year-old mom.
Right. I love that because I think so many times we think like, oh, this is just me. This is the way I am. Like I have to, like, I'm just going to stick with this. There's no way to break it. So you're kind of giving people the freedom to be like, no, if there's a habit that you want to change or get rid of, like you can do that. And so you kind of mentioned like the difference between like baby sleep and then toddler versus a 5-year-old. So what are the biggest, I would say, for lack of a better word, issues or things people come to you for like each kind of age, I guess I would say?
I would say with the newborn stage, what I hear a lot is that parents, if they try to transfer their child, the child wakes up instantly, or just that they will only sleep on someone. And again, this is really normal for newborns. That in and of itself isn't necessarily a problem, especially if you have help and you're asking, for help, you have a support group. If you're doing it on your own and they'll only sleep on you, that obviously makes it a lot harder. But so that's kind of the main thing I see with the newborn age. Into the baby stage, it's it can be a wide range of things, from short naps to taking a long time to fall asleep initially. A lot of baby mamas having to bounce on the yoga ball for like 20 minutes before the baby settles to sleep. Lots of night wakings, waking every 2 to 3 hours past that newborn stage, early wakings. So those are the things that I see most. And really it's a wide range of things with the baby age. And then the toddler and preschooler age, that's really when they're asserting their independence and they're learning much more about cause and effect. Like, if I do this, then this is the pattern I'm seeing that happens. This is how my parents respond. Sometimes we're dealing with them being in a bed versus a crib. So then, even more that brings out the fact that we need boundaries around sleep, because if we don't, they can come and go as they please, and they may run in and out of their room 50 times before they fall asleep at night, or sneak into mom and dad's room in the middle of the night. And again, none of these in and of themselves are problems unless it's a problem for the family. So not going to make a blanket statement that your child sneaking out of their room and into your bed in the middle of the night is a bad thing. If you enjoy that and it works for everyone, and everyone is getting the sleep they need to function, then that's okay. But if it's not working and it's becoming a disaster, that's when I would say it's a quote unquote problem.
Okay. And you make such a good point, because I think, especially in like mommy Facebook groups, I always try to say this is like, it's so easy for people to point the finger and be like, well, we did this, so this is what you should do too, because you're in that situation. But it's important to remember that everyone's different, and what might work really well for one family might not work the same for another family. So you made a great point. Like, everything's individual. So if you're okay with it, you don't need to do anything different, but if you're feeling like there's some kind of change that needs to be made, then definitely make that change.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I know you really want to break down some different baby and toddler sleep myths, because, myths are kind of dangerous. You just said yourself, you're like, I don't want to make a blanket statement because they can have such negative connotations, because one person could hear it and be like, oh, that's true for everyone, so myths can be very dangerous in that same way. So let's break down some of the common myths that we hear. So I know like the first one you want to talk about is that sleep training isn't a necessity.
Yeah. So often sleep training can get talked about as like this rite of passage. And, like we said, I'm never going to give like a blanket statement of every family needs to sleep train, because it totally depends on the family's priorities and their circumstances and their goals and just their family life in general, on whether they would want to or not. So while sleep training can absolutely be beneficial and is the valid choice, it's also, you're not going to do a disservice or put your child at a disadvantage if you don't sleep train. Your child will not sleep with you or need you to sleep forever. It may be 2 years or 5 years or 10 years, or, at the very least, when they move out of the house, they're going to move past needing your help to sleep at some point. So it's okay to not sleep train. You shouldn't feel any guilt about not sleep training, just like you shouldn't feel guilt about sleep training.
Yeah. Awesome. And the next one, I think I wrote wrong in our thing. It's sleep training is harmful, is the myth. Correct. Okay.
Yeah, correct. I knew what you meant. Yeah, so there is a lot of, I would say, lack of understanding of the research we do have around sleep training, and then a lot of things that are kind of miscited or research and observations that are misused to say that sleep training is harmful. So, for example, we have longitudinal studies that look at kids who were sleep trained. Probably the most famous one is a 5-year study followed families, and 5 years after sleep training, after that initial meeting, they compared the children who were sleep trained with the children who weren't, and found no differences whatsoever. And so we have that evidence. There is no evidence of harm in the literature, and that goes back to what we last talked about too. There were no differences in these kids, so you also aren't saying that kids who were sleep trained are better off than their counterparts. That's just not what we found. And then there are things, on the other side where, oh gosh, I could get into some things. You stop me if if I'm talking too much, but just, a lot of times, some of the brain damage that we know happens from abuse and neglect situations, that is often equated to sleep training. And I would say sleep training in a loving environment is nowhere near abuse and neglect and what children in orphanages who lay in cots all day because there aren't enough hands. These are two very different things, and so trying to draw parallels is just it's gross in my opinion. And then things like research on monkeys, like baby monkeys who have literally never had contact with their mothers, and looking at the response, how they handle that stress, that being equated to sleep training. There's a lot of just extremes. It's really used in an extreme way, but the data just isn't there. There's nothing that is looking at sleep training from a study perspective that shows harm, that has found harm.
Sleep props aren't bad or good.
Yeah. So a lot of times I do a lot of calls with parents. I do a free call before families work with me just to hear their situation, to see if we'd be a good fit. And I hear time and time again from moms, usually it's moms saying, oh, I've been nursing him to sleep forever, and I know that's bad, and I know I need to stop it. And I always stop parents, and I'm like, it's not bad. What you're doing, this isn't like a moral issue, right? It's what you've been doing, and it's probably been working for you for a period of time because that's why you've continued to do it. And now you've reached the point where it's not serving you anymore and you want to change. So it's never bad to nurse your child to sleep or to rock them to sleep or to help them to sleep in any way. That's not bad, but it may reach a point where it's unhelpful. And you're the one that makes that decision, not any outside person saying, oh, that's bad, you shouldn't do that. You're making a rod for your back, or you're spoiling them. You are the parent and you get to decide what's helpful and what's not helpful.
It's like kind of back to what we were saying before about like everyone's kind of different, and we shouldn't be necessarily labeling things as good and bad. Obviously there's extremes of things that are good and bad, but yeah, it's like how someone parents or chooses to parent should not be labeled as good or bad when it's just what works in their family. Oh, hello.
I have a cat here.
And we kind of touched on this very briefly, but sleep training does not mean cry it out.
Yeah, and that's another big just blanket statement. There are lots of different options for sleep training. There are methods where you can absolutely leave the room. You could come in and do checks and do comfort at intervals, or as your baby needs it. There's also options where you stay in the room the whole time and you're right by the crib and you are offering that comfort and soothing as they're figuring this thing out. So there's a whole spectrum of how you can respond, and simply just leaving, shutting the door and not going in for 12 hours, that is not sleep training. There are lots of options within sleep training. And sometimes I think that term cry it out, it's really kind of just become a random phrase. Like most of the time when people say it, I don't think they fully flesh out what they mean by it. Some people just mean anytime a child may cry. Some people mean extinction, where you would shut the door and not return. Some people use it not even to do with sleep training, like, oh, she was upset because she wanted a cookie and I said no and I let her cry it out. People use it for all different types of things, which is fine. But when we are talking about it, we need to make sure that we understand what we're meaning by it. So I would say, on that note, that if a parent is meaning that they want to sleep train with no crying at all, typically I say that that's kind of an unreasonable expectation. There are some babies that are more laid back and that do sleep train with zero crying, but that's not most families. And if it was, then it wouldn't be a problem changing sleep habits, or it wouldn't be hard in the first place. So it goes back to kind of what we talked about at the very beginning, with understanding that crying is our form of communication, and it's how your child's letting you know how they feel. Doesn't mean that it's a fire that must be put out right away. Doesn't mean that we can't respond to them, because we absolutely can. But if we're looking for our child to never feel discomfort when we're changing sleep habits, that's probably not a reasonable expectation to go into the sleep training process with.
I think that's a great way of you breaking it down, because like even in the group, I hear like so quickly, like someone will ask about sleep training, and then there's all these angry moms that come in and it's like, you're going to let your baby cry it out. And then, share all these reports. And it's like, she never once said that, but I feel like there's such that negative, connotation. So I think it's really important to really break down what, sleep training is. So for those, moms, and then for the moms also kind of interested, what's something that you wish more moms and, parents in general knew about sleep training?
I feel like I've said this several times, but I think the biggest thing is that it's not black and white, that in sleep training, there is tons and tons of gray area, and that most people fall within that gray area when they sleep train, and even when I work with families, I mean, I'm going to give them what I think is what I would recommend, what I think is, the best call for each situation in their individual lives. But it's up to them to take that and then say, okay, do we want to do it this way, or do we want to do it this way? I like to present parents with options, because it's not black and white. It's not just like following one master checklist. There's a range of varieties and options and ways you can go.
Awesome. Could definitely be, personalized to them, and again, like whatever fits for them. So how important do you think it is for parents to come up with some kind of sleep schedule for their child, whether it's a young, baby, a toddler, or, a 5-year-old?
I'm a big fan of schedules. I will say sometimes I like the word routines a little better. Schedule a lot of times can feel very rigid and black and white, right? Whereas routines are more gray. And so children thrive under routines. I don't care what age they are. It helps them feel safe. They know what to expect. It's that predictability is huge. So I think having routines is important. And then within, each age group, there are going to be just certain schedules. So for an example, a 5-month-old is probably not going to do well if we try to just give them one nap a day. That would be very little amount of day sleep for a 5-month-old. They're probably going to do a lot better with 3 naps a day. And that's just what we see across the board. So having kind of a schedule doesn't have to be strict or rigid, but that makes sense for your child and where they're at developmentally. That I think that can make all the difference in helping them just thrive and be happier. But when we are working on sleep training, with my families, I like to start at bedtime first. So we make sure they have a good day of a schedule that's appropriate for their age, and that they've gotten good naps, however we needed to get them during the day before we start that first night, because we want them rested before we go into making changes.
Kind of going off of that, so how can parents understand what would be the best sleep program for their family? I know you said you do like introductory calls with them, like kind of what does that look like, and how do you know, or how do they kind of figure out what's kind of best?
I think definitely talking about it, and we live in this great age of social media. So you can also, if you're looking at a couple consultants, you can learn a lot about their philosophy and how they talk and how they work with families before you even get on a call with them. And a lot of times that's what happens with families when I talk to them. They're like, I know you think this, and I know you think this, and I've been listening to you for X amount of months. And so I think that's really helpful to just do your research, before feeling like you have to just pick someone and decide. And when I talk to families, we talk through their situation so I can get a good understanding. And sometimes when I'm on a call with a family, I can tell like they're feeling pressured into sleep training, but they're not ready for it. And so I just tell them that, I don't want to work with families who aren't ready to make a change, because I know that it's just not going to be a good situation for them. Or sometimes I'll be talking to a family and they're like, oh yeah, we really need to sleep train. And as we talk through things, I'm like, so what are your issues with sleep? And they're like, well, sleep's actually going okay. Like we don't have many complaints. And I'm like, well, then you don't need to sleep train. Like, if you're fine with it, you don't have complaints, So I think talking to someone and just getting a feel for, are they pressuring you into a situation, or are they just being curious and figuring out your needs and kind of where you're at?
That you make a really good point, because it's kind of into that like I should do this kind of thing. So there could be a lot of moms out there that like maybe their best friend or their neighbor does sleep training, so they're like, oh yeah, they did it at 5 months old, so I should start looking into it. Yeah. And so that's a great point of kind of analyzing and getting on a call at least to kind of see like, okay, what is currently going on with my baby? Okay, what would I want to change? Or is there anything? Yeah, that's a great point. That kind of like looking inward, and that will probably help them answer so many of those questions.
Yeah. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, this is like so helpful to have. So where can everyone follow you? What kind of programs you offer? All that good stuff.
Yeah. So my business is All the Sleep. So you can find me at All the Sleeps, allthesleeps.com. I'm on Instagram. I'm pretty active on Instagram. I love making reels. They're so fun. Um, but I also have a YouTube channel and a podcast. So you can find all of that if you just head to my website, allthesleeps.com. And I work with families in a variety of ways. So I have, like I mentioned, a ton of free resources. So a lot of families I have that have followed me for years or that listen to my podcast, they're like, I've never actually had to pay you because I just listen to your stuff and it answers my questions. I'm like, great, like that's my goal, But I also have courses. So if you're kind of a DIY parent, I have course options. And then I work one-on-one with families. So if you feel like you need someone to really give you a specific plan for your family and then have that follow-up support, check-ins, phone calls, emails, I have those options as well.
Great. I love that you have so many different options and platforms that people can kind of check out and see what's best for them. So that's great. And so I always like to end these interviews with a fun thinking question, I always call it. So if you could have a billboard made today where you could share one tip with moms everywhere, what would you have it say?
Okay, I'm gonna repeat what I feel like I've said.
It's okay.
Parenting is not black and white, right? There's not one right way to parent. And I think more moms need to know that, because we feel like, oh, I've got to be over here doing this, or oh, I got to be over here doing this, stay away from that. And it's gray. It's all gray.
Yeah.
As long as you love your kids, it's the rest is like background noise, I think.
I love that. I could actually see that like on a billboard, one of these days I'm going to put everyone's quotes with their like picture or something on there. Because I think that's really powerful, because, it's kind of like what we say a lot in the Facebook group is like, one mom's way of parenting is not going to work for everyone, or your way of parenting. It's just, you got to figure out, like, see what's out there, but then see what works best with your family, because every family is different. So yeah, that's great. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on. It was great talking with you. And like I said, this is a topic I see come up all the time. So it was great having an expert on and talking about this.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me. It was fun.
All right, guys, it's time for our Mom Tales of the Week. And this week we asked you to share a funny food-related story, and you guys did not disappoint. I wasn't sure which direction this would kind of go, and you guys just all kind of took your own direction. So I thought that was great. Okay, number 1, Nicole. Last week, my son was waving his fork around with a piece of food on it, and before I could tell him not to do that, the food flew off and hit my husband in the forehead and stuck there. I had to leave the table because I was laughing so hard. Okay, the first time I read this, I was literally cracking up at my desk because I was just picturing the whole scene. Like, it's like one of those scenes from a movie where you feel like that could never happen, but I could totally see it happening. Like, how do you contain yourself when something like that happens? You can't. You just gotta laugh. Okay, number 2, Amanda. When my daughter, now 10, was 2, I caught her standing in the fridge eating a stick of butter. Pause. Okay, I need to know, like, what kind of fridge was this that she was just standing in the fridge and eating a stick of butter? I mean, she went for the good stuff, I guess. I always thought it was funny in like TV shows. At least I remember seeing it every once in a while when, like, you know, the mom would be upset or something. She would have a stick of butter with like salt and be like eating it, or maybe with sugar. I was like, I never thought to do that. Maybe they're onto something. All right, there's more. When my son, now 8, was 4, his favorite food was grilled cheese, but he hated bread and he hated cheese. So we never told him what it was made from. One day his sister says, "You know, it's just bread and cheese, right?" I was so mad. He wouldn't eat for weeks until he forgot what she said. That's hilarious. I love like the logic with some kids. Like, they're so particular about foods, but they will like it. There's the idea of the food they don't like. Like my brother, when he was younger, oh gosh, there were so many things. So my parents would make us this thing we would just call it strawberries and cream, and we would just be strawberries with sour cream on top and brown sugar. If it sounds gross to you, don't knock it till you try it because it's so good. Oh my gosh, I recently had it, not with sour cream, but with Greek yogurt. Because Greek yogurt and sour cream are very similar. But anyways, and it's still so good. The brown sugar, it just all ties in together. Anyways, so he hated sour cream though. He would not eat it like on tacos or anything. He wouldn't put it on. And so we would always just say strawberries and cream. Oh, can I have more cream? And they'd be like, sure. And they'd like turn away and put it in until one day he saw the container and he would not trust them. He would not eat it. It was the same way with, I think it was chicken maybe. He would eat chicken sandwiches but not turkey, and so my mom would be like, oh yeah, it's chicken, and just put like turkey on the sandwich, and he didn't know. He was like, oh yeah, like it's good, until he realized one day it was turkey. So it's more about like the idea of it. Number 3, Caitlin. My son is 10 months old, and whenever he has a tantrum, he will cry and throw himself down on his face, all dramatic, several times before he will finally pick up to calm him down, and I can't help but just laugh. So this doesn't tie into food, but I feel like she really wanted to share this story, so we just put it in anyways. Maybe it has to do with food, and then maybe that part was left out. But we're just gonna leave it, and I think it's great. Okay, number 4, Kaylee. When my daughter was a year old, she's 2 now, I was making chocolate chip cookies. Well, I had some on the table cooling, and I thought they were pushed back far enough. I noticed she had disappeared, so I called her, and she came walking into the kitchen with not just 1, but 2 cookies, eating away with the biggest smile. She got chocolate all over her face. Oh man, I've been there. Gotta like sneak the cookies, run away. They'll never know. It's fine. That's funny. I mean, how can you resist the smell of cookies? Number 5, Kelly. My son wanted cereal. I asked if he wanted it dry or with milk. He said with milk. I gave him a bowl of cereal in milk, and he refused to touch it because the cereal had milk on it. Turns out he wanted both milk and cereal in the bowl, but not be touching. He was very mad that bowls didn't work this way. Hey, maybe it's a new invention. You have a bowl with like a divider in the middle. I'm sure there's something out there. There's all kinds of things. But that's hilarious that he thought like you were so such an amazing mom that you could somehow like a force field that they wouldn't touch. All right, number 6, anonymous. I set a bowl of microwavable mac and cheese on fire by not adding water. This is a case of the distracted mom. I mean, come on, you got so many things going on. Can we really blame you? No. We've all been guilty of stuff like this. I mean, oh gosh, I've put my coffee mug places. I've put things in the fridge that don't belong in the fridge. We've all been there. Number 7, anonymous. Was doing too many things at once. Go figure. Here we go. We got another one. I went to warm up my Olive Garden leftovers in the fridge. First the pasta, I pulled it out. Then I put in the breadsticks. I walked away to help my son with something, only to hear sparks and see a flash in our microwave. I ran over and opened it. I had put the breadsticks in the microwave in the foil wrapper. I'm just glad I stopped before a fire started. You gotta be quick with those. And you have to be careful because sometimes to-go containers, yeah, like have the foil on the inside. Those Olive Garden ones are sneaky because they look like a regular bag, but they got that heat technology or whatever. So, yep. Awesome, guys. Well, thank you so much for sharing your funny food-related stories, except for that one that wasn't food-related, but you know what? We're going to make it work. We ask new questions every single Friday on our social media and in our Facebook group. And tell us what questions or what funny stories you have. Maybe we'll just do a more generic one and just see what you guys want to share. I love reading these stories. It kind of just adds to the community, finding things to laugh at, and yeah, going through life together. All right, guys. Thanks for tuning into this episode, and I will see you next week. Thank you so much for watching this episode. But before you go, make sure you like, subscribe, and ring that bell so you get notified of future episodes. We release new episodes every single Wednesday. See you next week.